My name is Bella, just your average housewife, married for 2 years until I turned 27. Luck in the love department seemed to elude me entirely. I attended an all-girls private middle and high school, followed by an all-women's university. After graduating, I landed a job as a receptionist at a large corporation, where, unsurprisingly, all my colleagues were women. In my social circle, it was typical for people to be invited to parties by business executives, but I never received such invitations. The reason was simple. Whenever I conversed with men, nerds rendered me speechless. While I often received compliments on my appearance and was asked out a few times, dinner conversations with kind-hearted gentlemen would invariably end with remarks like, "You're pretty, but there's not much else to you." Then destiny knocked on my door. "Bella, will you go out with me?" That's what Lex, an employee from one of our client companies, said to me. Speculations arose among those around us, assuming we were dating since he would only give his contact information to me. However, that wasn't the case. Despite Lex's attempts to engage me in conversation, I merely responded with polite smiles, as I did with everyone else. I believed I was destined to remain single forever. But then his confession changed everything. Can we maybe just start off as friends?" Caught off guard, that was my reply. Yet he nodded eagerly, his enthusiasm apparent as if his head might fall off. As he entered the office, still smiling, I realized this was a first for me. Until now, encounters with men had always been tainted by ulterior motives. But with Lex, I sensed no such intentions, only pure affection. Thrilled, I went out with him a few times, though I remained nervous and struggled with conversation. Yet he accepted me for who I was. That's when I knew. "Lex, would you like to be in a relationship with me?" He was overjoyed, almost to the point of tears. This moment, this question, it all happened 2 years ago on Christmas. At that time, I felt extremely happy, believing I'd be blessed forever with such a loving person. But cracks appeared in the facade when his company went bankrupt. Now, 2 years later, at 29, I called to my still sleeping husband. "Lex, you should probably wake up now." Putting on my shoes, I left the house, the sole breadwinner for our household. His company had gone under 6 months ago, and he'd been jobless since. Despite his efforts in job hunting, the economy's downturn and saturation in his industry made it difficult. Even if he received an offer, it often amounted to a take-home salary of just $2,000, making it challenging for him to commit to changing jobs. Despite it all, I continued to stand by him, knowing that our love wasn't superficial enough to fade just because of unemployment. My salary had always been modest, and we never lived a life of luxury. Our home was a 2-bedroom rental apartment, over 30 years old, in a building that wasn't secure and was a 30-minute walk from the train station. Yet I was willing to compromise on many things to keep our life together intact. I sensed that my husband was struggling to move on from the shock of his company going bankrupt. Despite having a few job offers, he seemed stuck. I patiently waited, hoping he'd find the right fit and recover emotionally. However, as time passed, my hope dwindled and his mental state deteriorated. He began taking his stress out on me, occasionally raising his hand in anger. Though his actions left no lasting marks, I endured it, believing he was suffering more than me and wanting to be supportive. Then finally, he landed a new job in a completely different industry. The new place was willing to hire him despite his lack of experience, and he accepted the offer. I felt relieved, thinking I wouldn't have to endure his outbursts anymore. I had questioned if he was becoming abusive, but it seemed like a phase. He threw himself into his work at the new company and even got promoted to team lead within a year. As I turned 30, thoughts of starting a family crossed my mind. However, the loving man I married seemed to have vanished. "Hey, I told you I like toast. Why did you make pancakes? And if you're going to serve fruit, at least remove the pit." He snapped over trivial matters, his temper flaring over the smallest things. His remarks turned increasingly hurtful. "Really? Do you have to speak like that? You're an adult, Lex. Take out the pit yourself," I retorted, my patience wearing thin. In response, he slammed his fist into the wall, intimidating me. Though I wasn't confrontational by nature, I instinctively recognized his behavior as emotional abuse. Lately, I'd been careful not to provoke him, but our fights had become frequent, leaving me emotionally drained. The breaking point came when he directed his frustration at me again. The pressure of his new job seemed to be the root cause. Despite his promotion to team leader and talks of further advancements, the stress was taking its toll, and I was the easier target. Unable to bear the emotional strain any longer, I made a difficult decision. Actually, I quit my job. As I turned 30 and transitioned into the role of a housewife, it was a decision I had long planned. I had always intended to leave my receptionist job in my 30s to pursue something I truly desired. My husband was aware of this aspiration, so when the time came, I retired from my job as planned. However, it seemed that he wasn't entirely pleased with my decision. In this day and age, women need to work too. I can support both of us on my salary alone, you know. Do you even appreciate who's provided for you? He complained one evening over dinner, then swiftly grabbed his bag and left for work. It struck me deeply. When he was jobless, I had been the one supporting him. So why was I now being blamed? His attitude began to create an emotional distance between us. Then one day, I returned home to find unfamiliar shoes at the door. To my surprise, my mother-in-law was lounging in the living room. "Oh, Mom, what are you doing here?" I asked, puzzled by her presence. My mom flatly stated, "Didn't Lex tell you? I'm moving in here from today." It was news to me. Later, I learned that my father-in-law had passed away and my mother-in-law was feeling lonely. My husband had suggested she move in, but no one had consulted me. Stunned, I stood there as my mother-in-law ordered me to start making dinner, emphasizing that a homemaker's worth is proven by serving her family. Confused and frustrated, I went to the kitchen to prepare dinner anyway. However, as the food was nearly ready, my mother-in-law intervened. "Lex hates burgers. This is garbage," she declared, dumping the nearly finished dish into the trash. Stunned into silence, I watched as she rummaged through the fridge and began cooking without asking. Finally regaining my composure, I paused, holding my hand up to my mother, trying to explain that I had planned meals for the week and bought groceries accordingly. But before I could finish, my husband dumped flour on my head. Coughing from the cloud of flour, I continued to watch my mother-in-law make her dish, and then she demanded I clean up. When my husband eventually came home, he was delighted to see the meal. "Oh yes, this is the kind of food I want. No meat for salads. Fried stuff is the best," he exclaimed, ignoring me as he happily sat down to eat with Mom. At that moment, my heart felt like it had been smashed and painted over with black ink. From then on, the daily harassment from my mother-in-law and the emotional abuse from my husband continued. I felt like there was no place for me in this home. Despite my husband's insistence on intimacy, under the circumstances, I naturally couldn't accept. I had been avoiding getting pregnant, even though I was already 30, because I didn't want a child with this abusive man. Then finally, the last straw broke. My mother-in-law said she was feeling unwell and asked me to drive her to the hospital. Reluctantly, I agreed. However, when I went to pick her up, a social worker called me into a separate room. "You must be having a tough time doing all the housework and childcare alone, but taking it out on your husband and mother-in-law isn't good," she said. Apparently, my mother-in-law had been claiming that I caused her bruises from a fall. Worse, she had been going to the hospital multiple times and consulting about me each visit. It seemed she had chosen today to deliver the final blow. The social worker, not knowing the whole story, just blamed me. "You should take better care of children and the elderly," she scolded, unaware that our family didn't even have kids. That was it. I had reached my limit. When I was told I might need psychiatric help, I threatened to sue for violating my rights. "I'm the one being abused here, not the other way around," I insisted, presenting evidence of my husband's abuses and the burn marks deliberately caused by my mother-in-law. The social worker said she needed to confirm this with my mother-in-law, but I refused and left the hospital on my own. Soon after, my mother-in-law and husband returned home. Apparently, my mother-in-law told my husband that I'd been mean to her. Shaking with anger, my husband accused me of being a parasite, leaving him alone to care for his mother. "How dare you abandon my mother?" he shouted. I didn't bother to correct him. Tired of the constant lies, I walked out of the house, ignoring them both. That day, I didn't return home. Instead, I spent the night in a business hotel. Thankfully, I had my wallet and cell phone, so I could easily buy a charger. I decided not to go back home for a while and ignore both of them. However, one day while walking near the house, I ran into a woman in her 50s who lived across from our apartment. "I've been getting worried. Haven't seen you around. Also heard from your mom that you and your husband are going on vacation for a week or so," she said. Hearing this, I couldn't help but let out a dry laugh. But then I thought, if not now, when? I immediately contacted a moving company and asked them to help me move out as soon as possible, even if it was a bit more expensive. Luckily, I didn't have much stuff, and the movers arranged to send everything to my parents' house in just 3 days. Let's see how my clueless husband and his mother, who have no idea how much I've contributed to our home, react. I thought as they faced their empty house. Then I went back to my parents' home. A few days later, my husband called me. "Hey, Bella, where are you? Your room is empty," he said, catching wind of the situation. He kept demanding to know where I was, but I simply replied, "None of your business." I calmly informed him, "By the way, I've already filled out the divorce papers since you've threatened divorce before. Just sign and submit them." After hanging up, I blocked his number, and thus a peaceful life began. I woke up, did yoga, prepared breakfast, and sat down at the table with my parents. Lunch with mom and dinner as a family again. It felt so normal yet comforting, a happiness I hadn't felt in a long time. My parents were surprised when they received my thanks but welcomed me warmly. However, things took a turn when my husband found out I was at my parents' and waited for me nearby. I tried to run when I saw him, but he caught up and grabbed my arm, insisting, "Bella, let's go home. The house is a mess without you." His grip tightened, and I yelled for help. A high school boy in his sports uniform happened to be passing by and came to my aid, while a nearby businessman called the police. With the police present, my husband retreated quietly. But as expected, my raging mother-in-law stormed into my parents' house, hurling insults and threats. Meanwhile, my mother-in-law was outside our place, screaming threats and even mentioning defamation lawsuits. My dad was about to confront her, but I held him back, saying, "It's okay, I'm ready to settle this." I called my husband, who noticed the incoming call while next to his mother, and boldly said, "I know you're cheating, and I have evidence. I'm going to sue you for abuse and get a settlement when we divorce." Hearing this, my husband began to panic. In truth, I had hired a detective to gather evidence after hearing rumors about him going to a hotel with a coworker. So I had ample evidence of his infidelity, including a medical certificate from a hospital visit and recorded conversations. I planned to confront my husband and his mother once I felt emotionally ready, but I wouldn't remain silent when they insulted my parents. Aware that my mother-in-law had been taking money from my wallet, I confronted them about the state of the house and the complaints from neighbors. My husband was at a loss for words, finally confronted with the consequences of his actions. I received this information from a concerned neighbor who revealed that my husband and his mother were out of town. Apparently, they were struggling with basic household chores, resulting in the house turning into a mess. There were even complaints to the property management about their daily loud arguments. Perhaps now my husband realizes the extent of my contributions to our household and wants me to return. But it's too late for that. I'm not coming back to live happily ever after with him and his beloved mom. After conveying this, I hung up the phone. Shortly after, my mother-in-law attempted to forcefully enter my home, prompting me to call the police. They intervened, and both she and my husband were arrested. Later, I discovered from my neighbor that they had disregarded all the complaints reported to the management company. The situation escalated to the point where it caused a mass exodus from the entire apartment complex. The management took legal action against them for their disruptive behavior, seeking damages. Ultimately, they were ordered by the court to vacate and pay damages. Now they're blacklisted in the real estate market, unable to find another place to rent. As it turned out, the reason for the unpaid rent was my husband's costly mistake at work, resulting in a pay cut. Unable to secure housing in the area, he resigned from his job and moved far away, only to encounter further obstacles in finding employment. Eventually, he found himself homeless, and his mother resorted to shoplifting, leading to her arrest for injuring a store clerk during the confrontation. I learned about their downward spiral through online news, but beyond that, I didn't delve further. After the divorce, I pursued my dream of working in a cafe. There, I met and befriended a colleague who was 5 years younger than me. By the age of 34, I remarried. By 40, we opened our own dream cafe together. And now I'm pregnant. It may be a late-life pregnancy, but I've never been happier.